20 innocent peoples executed or killed by court order. Number 1. Ruben Cantu. On November 8, 1984, Ruben Cantu, a 17-year-old from San Antonio, Texas, and his 15-year-old co-defendant, David Garza, allegedly broke into a house under construction in San Antonio, where two men, Pedro Gomez and Juan Marino, were sleeping. The men were shot multiple times during a robbery attempt. Gomez died at the scene, while Marino survived and later identified Cantu as the shooter. Cantu was sentenced to death in 1985 and executed by lethal injection on August 24, 1993. At the age of 26, Cantu maintained his innocence throughout the trial and up until his execution. Years after Cantu's execution, significant doubts emerged regarding his guilt. Marino later stated that he had been pressured by police into identifying Cantu as the shooter and that he did not believe Cantu was the attacker. Number 2. Larry Griffin. Larry Griffin was a Missouri man executed in 1995 for the 1980 murder of 19-year-old Quentin Moss in St. Louis. Griffin maintained his innocence until his death. His conviction was based largely on the testimony of Robert Fitzgerald, a convicted drug dealer who claimed to have witnessed the shooting. However, Griffin was left-handed, yet Fitzgerald testified that the shooter fired with his right hand. Additionally, Griffin's fingerprints were not found on the car or weapons involved in the crime. After Griffin's execution, new evidence emerged suggesting his innocence. Number 3. Joseph Odell. Joseph Roger Odell was a Virginia man executed in 1997 for the 1985 rape and murder of Helen Shartner, a 44-year-old secretary from Virginia Beach, whose body was discovered in a muddy field in Virginia Beach. Though Odell was seen at the bar and his clothes had blood in it, he still maintained his innocence throughout the trial and until his death. After Odell was executed by lethal injection on July 23, 1997, DNA tests on the evidence were conducted, revealing that the blood found on his clothing did not match the victim's blood. This raised significant doubts about his guilt. Number 4. David Spence. David Wayne Spence was a Texas man executed in 1997 for the 1982 murders of 3 teenagers near Lake Waco. All 3 teenage girls were stabbed multiple times, and the girls were also raped. Prosecutors alleged that Spence was hired by convenience store owner Munir Deeb to kill another woman but mistakenly killed Montgomery instead, then murdered Rice and Franks to eliminate witnesses. Spence was convicted and sentenced to death. In 1984, investigators, including Detective Raymond Salinas and Lieutenant Marvin Horton, later expressed doubts about his involvement. Horton stated, "I do not think David Spence committed this crime," and Salinas added, "Nothing from the investigation ever led us to any evidence that he was involved." The case against Spence relied heavily on bite mark evidence. Spence was executed by lethal injection. On April 3, 1997, he maintained his innocence until his death, stating, "I want you to understand I speak the truth when I say I didn't kill your kids. Honestly, I have not killed anyone." Number 5. Leo Jones. Leo Jones was a black man convicted in Florida for the 1981 murder of a Jacksonville police officer, Thomas Shafransky. On May 23, 1981, Officer Shafransky was shot in the head while sitting in his patrol car. Within hours, police zeroed in on Jones, who lived in an apartment near the crime scene. Jones confessed during police interrogation but later recanted, claiming the confession was coerced or enforced through beatings and threats. On March 24, 1998, after 17 years on death row, Leo Jones was executed in Florida's electric chair. His death remains a point of contention in discussions about wrongful convictions, coerced confessions, and racial bias in the criminal justice system. Number 6. Gary Graham. Gary Graham, also known as Shaka Sankofa, was a black man convicted at age 17 for the 1981 murder of Bobby Lambert, a man shot in a Houston, Texas parking lot. His conviction was based almost entirely on the testimony of a single eyewitness, who said she saw Graham commit the murder from about 30 feet away, through her car windshield, at night. No physical evidence linked Graham to the crime, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no forensic proof. Several other witnesses later said they saw the shooter, and it was not Graham, but their testimonies were never heard by the jury. Graham maintained his innocence throughout nearly 19 years on death row. Civil rights leaders, activists, and even some public officials called for a new trial, citing the weak evidence and lack of due process. Despite growing public pressure and last-minute appeals, Graham was executed by lethal injection on June 22, 2000 in Texas. Number 7. Claude Jones. Claude Jones was convicted of capital murder in Texas for the 1989 shooting death of liquor store owner Alan Hilzendager in San Jacinto County. The case against Jones relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. The key piece of physical evidence was a single strand of hair found at the crime scene, which prosecutors claimed matched Jones through a microscopic hair comparison. A forensic method later discredited for its unreliability. There were no eyewitnesses to the shooting, and no other physical evidence directly tied Jones to the murder. Jones consistently maintained his innocence, claiming he was not at the scene and that another man, who had driven him that day, was responsible for the killing. Despite these doubts, Jones was convicted and sentenced to death in 1990 before his execution. His lawyers requested DNA testing on the hair, arguing it could definitively prove his innocence. The state denied the request. Claude Jones was executed by lethal injection on December 7, 2000, 10 years later. In 2010, DNA testing finally conducted on the hair revealed it did not belong to Jones. Number 8. Cameron Todd Willingham. Cameron Todd Willingham was a Texas man convicted of arson murder in the 1991 deaths of his 3 young daughters Amber, Carmen, and Cameron, who died in a house fire in Corsicana, Texas. Prosecutors argued that Willingham had intentionally set the fire, presenting evidence based on arson investigation techniques that were standard at the time. Fire investigators claimed patterns in the burn marks and floor damage indicated the use of accelerants. Willingham was also portrayed as violent and unremorseful. In jailhouse testimony alleged he had confessed to starting the fire. Willingham, however, consistently maintained his innocence, saying he had tried to save his daughters and that the fire was accidental. Years after his 1990 conviction and death sentence, fire experts re-examined the case and concluded that the original investigation relied on outdated and flawed science. A 2004 report from a leading arson expert found no evidence that the fire had been intentionally set. Despite this, the state of Texas did not halt the execution. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed by lethal injection on February 17, 2004. Number 9. George Stinney Jr. George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old black boy, was convicted of murdering 2 white girls. The entire trial lasted only 2 hours, with an all-white jury finding him guilty with no real evidence. He was so small that they had to use a booster seat in the electric chair. He was executed by the electric chair on June 16, 1944. 70 years later, his conviction was overturned because of the lack of evidence. Number 10. Carlos de Luna. On December 7, 1989, Carlos de Luna, a young Latino man, was executed for attempted robbery and the 1983 murder of Wanda Lopez, an employee at a gas station in Texas, USA. Years later, investigations found that another man, Carlos Hernandez, who looked just like him, was the real killer. De Luna insisted he was innocent until his death, and new evidence suggests he was wrongly executed. Number 11. Sedley Alley. Sedley Alley was convicted in Tennessee for the 1985 rape and murder of 19-year-old Marine Lance Corporal Suzanne Collins, who was attacked while jogging near the Millington Naval Base. Police arrested Alley after finding his car near the crime scene. He eventually confessed to the crime but later claimed The confession was coerced or enforced and false. Witness descriptions of the suspect and vehicle also didn't clearly match. Ali or his car, despite serious questions about the physical evidence and how the confession was obtained. Ali was convicted and executed by lethal injection on June 28, 2006. Number 12. Troy Davis. Troy Davis was convicted in Georgia for the 1989 murder of off-duty police officer Mark McPhail, who was shot while intervening in a fight outside a Burger King in Savannah. Davis was 19 at the time. The case against him relied entirely on eyewitness testimony. There was no physical evidence, no murder weapon, and Davis consistently maintained his innocence over the years, minus one of the 9 key witnesses who testified against. Davis later recanted or changed their stories, many citing police pressure. Some even implicated another man, Sylvester Red Coles, the first person to accuse Davis, after over 20 years on death row and multiple denied appeals. Troy Davis was executed by lethal injection on September 21, 2011, in Georgia. Number 13. Lester Bauer. Lester Bauer, a former chemical salesman with no criminal record, was convicted of the 1983 murders of 4 men in an airplane hangar in Grayson County, Texas. The victims were found shot execution style, and Bauer was arrested after investigators found that he had lied about owning an ultralight plane similar to one missing from the crime scene and possessed parts matching that aircraft. The prosecution argued Bauer killed the men to steal the plane. He admitted to lying about the purchase to hide an illegal deal but denied committing the murders. There was no direct physical evidence tying him to the killings. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, and no eyewitnesses. Years later, Bauer's defense presented new evidence suggesting the murders were related to a drug deal gone bad, including a woman's statement that her boyfriend and others may have committed the crime. Despite this, courts ruled that the evidence was too weak or came too late to overturn the conviction. Lester Bauer spent over 30 years on death row, one of the longest waits in U.S. history before being executed by lethal injection on June 3, 2015, at the age of 67. Number 14. Brian Terrell. Brian Keith Terrell was a Georgia man executed on December 9, 2015, for the 1992 murder of 70-year-old John Watson in Covington, Georgia. Terrell, then 47, was convicted of malice murder and 10 counts of first-degree forgery. Prosecutors claimed he stole Watson's checks, forged them, and killed Watson when he demanded repayment. Terrell was on parole at the time and allegedly shot Watson multiple times and severely beat him. Terrell maintained his innocence throughout the trial and execution. His defense argued that no physical evidence linked him to the crime. Footprints found near the victim's body were smaller than Terrell's, and none of the 13 fingerprints collected matched his. Additionally, a key witness later admitted to lying during testimony. Despite these claims, Terrell was executed by lethal injection at 12:52 a.m. on December 9, 2015, after the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal. Witnesses reported that as the execution drug was administered, Terrell mouthed the words, "Didn't do it." Number 15. Robert Pruitt. Pruitt was convicted in 2002 for the stabbing death of Officer Nagel, who was found in a pool of blood with a torn-up disciplinary report next to him. The prosecution argued that Pruitt killed Nagel in retaliation for the report, which had been issued earlier that day for Pruitt eating a sandwich in an unauthorized area. The murder weapon was a tape-wrapped metal rod, and an autopsy revealed that Nagel died from a heart attack caused by the assault. Pruitt maintained his innocence throughout the trial and appeals process, asserting that he had been framed by corrupt guards and inmates. He claimed that Nagel was targeted because he was investigating corruption within the prison system. DNA testing on the murder weapon yielded inconclusive results, and no physical evidence directly linked Pruitt to the crime. Despite these claims and the lack of conclusive evidence, Pruitt was executed by lethal injection at 6:46 p.m. CDT On October 12, 2017, his final words were, "I've hurt a lot of people, and a lot of people have hurt me. One day, there won't be a need to hurt people." He had been serving a 99-year sentence for a separate murder committed when he was 15 years old. Number 16. Carlton Michael Gary. Carlton Michael Gary, known as the Stalking Strangler, was executed in Georgia on March 15, 2018, for the 1977 murders of 3 elderly women in Columbus, Georgia. He was 67 years old at the time of his death. Gary was convicted in 1986 of raping and strangling 89-year-old Florence Skeibel, 69-year-old Martha Thurmond, and 74-year-old Kathleen Woodruff, all of whom were killed in their homes. Gary was executed by lethal injection. Gary's execution was the subject of controversy due to claims of innocence and procedural issues. New DNA evidence had excluded him as the source of semen found on one victim's clothing, and bite mark analysis did not match his dental records. Number 17. Larry Swearingen. Swearingen was arrested 3 days after Trotter disappeared from her community college in Conroe, Texas in December 1998. Her body was found nearly a month later in the Sam Houston National Forest. Prosecutors argued that Swearingen abducted, raped, and murdered Trotter, presenting circumstantial evidence, such as witness testimony and physical evidence linking him to the crime. He was convicted in 2000 and sentenced to death. Swearingen's defense team contended that the scientific evidence used to convict him was flawed. They argued that DNA found under Trotter's fingernails did not match Swearingen's, and that forensic experts testified she had been dead for less than 2 weeks, while Swearingen had been incarcerated for over 3 weeks before her body was found. Despite these claims, Swearingen was executed by administering a lethal injection at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. His final words were, "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing." He was pronounced dead at 6:47 p.m. Number 18. Walter Barton. Walter Barton was convicted in the 1991 murder of 81-year-old Gladys Kuller, a mobile home park operator in Ozark, Missouri. Kuller was found brutally stabbed more than 50 times in her trailer. Barton, who had visited her home the day of the murder, quickly became a suspect due to inconsistent statements and the presence of what prosecutors claimed was blood spatter on his clothing. Key forensic evidence, particularly the blood stain analysis, was later criticized by experts as flawed or overstated, and that no physical evidence definitively tied him to the crime. Nonetheless, after a final conviction in 2006, appeals were exhausted. On May 19, 2020, Walter Barton was executed by lethal injection in Missouri at the age of 64. Number 19. Nathaniel Woods. On June 17, 2004, police officers went to a known drug house in Birmingham to serve a warrant on Woods as they tried to arrest him. His friend Kerry Spencer opened fire with an assault rifle, killing the 3 officers and injuring a 4th. Woods was unarmed at the time and did not fire any shots. Woods was charged with capital murder under Alabama's accomplice liability law, which allows someone to be held equally responsible for a crime committed by another if they are seen as having helped or encouraged it. Prosecutors argued that Woods lured the officers into a trap, knowing Spencer would shoot. Spencer later admitted to acting alone, stating publicly, "Nathaniel Woods is 100% innocent." Despite this, Woods was executed by lethal injection on March 5, 2020, at Hallman Correctional Facility. Number 20. Marcellus Williams. In 2001, Williams was convicted for the 1998 murder of Felicia Gale, a former newspaper reporter, based on testimony from 2 informants who later received reward money. No physical or forensic evidence linked him to the crime scene or the murder weapon. DNA testing on the knife revealed an unknown male profile, excluding Williams as the source. Marcellus Williams was finally executed in Missouri on September 24, 2024, by lethal injection after spending over 2 decades on death row, mishandling of evidence, and racial discrimination in jury selection were cited as significant issues in his trial. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe for more videos.